The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Department of Veterans Affairs office in San Diego. Sarah Martinez stepped out of her old Honda Civic, adjusting the navy dress blues she wore with quiet confidence. At 32, she carried herself with the kind of precision that came from years of military discipline. Her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her medals arranged with mathematical exactness across her chest. What caught the attention of passers-by wasn't just her uniform, but the distinctive trident pin that gleamed on her chest, the coveted seal trident that marked her as one of the Navy's most elite warriors. In a world where women had only recently been allowed into combat roles, seeing a female SEAL was still rare enough to turn heads. Sarah had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispered conversations, and the occasional challenge to her credentials. She'd learned to let her actions speak louder than words, but today felt different. Today she had an appointment with a Veterans Affairs counselor about her disability benefits, a routine meeting that should have been straightforward. The VA office buzzed with its usual Monday morning activity. Veterans of various ages filled the waiting area, some in wheelchairs, others with visible injuries, many more carrying invisible wounds from their service. Sarah checked in at the front desk, where the receptionist's eyes lingered on her trident pin before quickly looking away. "Ms. Martinez, you can go to room 204, the receptionist said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Sarah made her way through the corridors lined with photographs of military heroes, her footsteps echoing against the polished floors. She knocked on the door marked 204 and entered to find a middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit sitting behind a desk covered with manila folders. "Please, have a seat," he said without looking up from his paperwork. When he finally raised his eyes, they immediately focused on her chest, specifically on the golden trident. His expression shifted from bureaucratic indifference to something approaching suspicion. "I'm reviewing your file, Ms. Martinez," he began, his tone now noticeably cooler. "I see you're claiming service-connected disabilities related to specialized military operations." Sarah nodded. "That's correct. I served with Naval Special Warfare for 6 years." The counselor's eyebrows rose slightly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with obvious skepticism. "Naval Special Warfare? The SEALs?" "Yes, sir." "And you expect me to believe that a woman served as a Navy SEAL?" Sarah had heard this question countless times, but something in his tone set her on edge. "I don't expect you to believe anything, sir. I'm simply providing the facts of my service record." The counselor picked up his phone without breaking eye contact. "Security? I need someone up in room 204. I may have a situation here." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Sir, I don't understand what—" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain seated while we sort this out." His voice had taken on the authority of someone who believed he was dealing with a fraud. Impersonating military personnel is a serious federal crime. Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared at the door. They were both veterans themselves, their bearing making that clear even in civilian clothes. The taller one, a man with graying temples, looked uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest, "I can provide documentation. My DD-214, my service records. Anyone can forge documents these days," the counselor interrupted. "What you can't forge is the training, the knowledge, the brotherhood. And lady, I've known plenty of SEALs in my time. You don't fit the profile." The security guards flanked Sarah's chair, though neither made a move to restrain her. The older guard cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us while we verify your claims." Sarah's mind raced. She thought about the missions she'd completed, the teammates she'd lost, the sacrifices she'd made for her country. All of it was being reduced to a question of whether she looked the part, according to some bureaucrat's limited imagination. "I understand your skepticism," she said, rising slowly from her chair. "But I'm telling you the truth. I earned this trident through the same hell every SEAL has endured," the counselor scoffed. "The same hell? Lady, do you have any idea what SEAL training involves? The physical demands? The mental torture? The dropout rate?" "I have more than an idea," Sarah replied quietly. "I lived it." As the security guards prepared to escort her from the room, Sarah's mind drifted back to the beaches of Coronado, to the bone-numbing cold of the Pacific Ocean during Hell Week, to the moment she'd earned the right to wear the trident she now wore. She remembered the doubt in her instructor's eyes, the extra scrutiny she'd faced, and the moment when doubt transformed into grudging respect. The walk down the corridor felt like a perp walk, with other veterans and VA employees stopping to stare. Sarah kept her head high, her bearing military straight even as whispers followed in her wake. She could hear fragments of conversations. Can you believe it? Stolen valor. What's the world coming to? In the security office, she was asked to sit in a plastic chair while phone calls were made. The older security guard, whose nameplate read Jenkins, kept shooting her apologetic glances. "Ma'am," he said quietly when his partner stepped out of the room. "For what it's worth, I served 2 tours with Marines who worked alongside SEALs. They didn't all look the same. Some were smaller than others, some were smarter than others. What they all had in common was something in their eyes." Sarah met his gaze. "And what do you see in mine?" Jenkins studied her for a long moment. "That's what's got me confused, ma'am. I see exactly what I'd expect to see." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Sarah could hear muffled voices from the outer office, the sound of someone making official inquiries. Her heart pounded as she realized her entire military career, her identity, her honor, was being called into question by people who had never walked in her boots. Through the office window, she could see the American flag fluttering in the breeze, and she wondered if this was how her service would be remembered. Not for the missions completed or the lives saved, but for a moment of doubt in a sterile government office where her worthiness was being debated by strangers. The phone calls continued for what felt like hours. Sarah sat in the security office watching Jenkins pace nervously while his partner, Rodriguez, maintained a stern expression behind his desk. The initial skepticism in the room had evolved into something more complex, uncertainty mixed with growing unease about the situation they'd found themselves in. "Ma'am," Rodriguez finally said after ending his 3rd phone call, "we're having trouble verifying your records through normal channels. The personnel offices we've contacted say they need more time to pull classified service records." Sarah wasn't surprised. SEAL operations were compartmentalized, and her specific service history involved missions that were still classified. Even her training records would require special clearance to access. "How long have you been wearing that uniform?" Jenkins asked, his tone more curious than accusatory now. "I retired 3 months ago," Sarah replied. "Medical discharge after a training accident damaged my knee and shoulder." The room fell quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah's mind wandered to her final months of active duty, the painful physical therapy sessions and the difficult decision to leave the teams. She'd fought to stay, but her body had finally reached its limits after years of punishment. Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it quickly, his expression growing more serious. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to the main security office. There are some people who want to speak with you." The walk through the VA building felt different this time. Word had spread about the woman claiming to be a SEAL, and Sarah could feel the weight of curious and skeptical stares following her progress. Some faces showed amusement, others displayed outright disbelief, and a few reflected the kind of anger that came from seeing what they perceived as stolen valor. The main security office was larger than the first, with multiple desks and a small conference room visible through glass walls. Waiting inside were 2 men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Sarah's heart sank as she realized this situation had escalated far beyond a simple verification issue. "Ms. Martinez," the taller agent said as she entered, "I'm Agent Williams with Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This is Agent Cooper. We understand you've been representing yourself as a former Navy SEAL." "I haven't been representing myself as anything other than what I am," Sarah replied carefully. Agent Cooper opened a folder on the table. "According to our preliminary records search, there's no Sarah Martinez listed among SEAL graduates from the past decade. Care to explain that?" Sarah felt her chest tighten. She knew this could happen. Her service records were classified at levels that might not be immediately accessible to investigators. "My operations were highly classified. Some records may be compartmentalized." "Compartmentalized," Williams repeated with obvious skepticism. "That's convenient." The interrogation that followed was thorough and uncomfortable. The agents questioned every detail of her claimed service, from basic SEAL training procedures to specific operational knowledge. Sarah answered each question accurately, drawing from her genuine experiences, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. "Tell us about Hell Week," Cooper demanded. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the grinding exhaustion, the hypothermia, the mental games designed to break the weakest candidates. Sunday night evolution starts with surf torture. You lay in the surf while instructors pour cold water over you and sand in your face. The key is controlled breathing and finding your mental safe space. Anyone could read that in a book, Williams interjected. The water temperature in February averages 58 degrees, Sarah continued. By Wednesday, you're hallucinating from sleep deprivation. I remember seeing purple elephants during a log carry on Thursday. My swim buddy had to keep me walking in a straight line. The specificity of her memories gave the agents pause, but their skepticism remained. They pressed her on technical details, operational procedures, and personal experiences that would be impossible to fake without genuine service experience. What's the significance of the number 40? Cooper asked suddenly. Percent, Sarah answered without hesitation. Instructors tell you that at any point during Hell Week, 40% of the remaining candidates will quit before the next evolution. It's psychological warfare. Hours passed in this manner, with the agents probing every aspect of her claimed service while Sarah provided detailed, accurate responses. The room grew tense as it became clear that either she was the most well-prepared imposter they'd ever encountered, or there was more to her story than their initial records check had revealed. During a break, Sarah overheard Williams on the phone in the hallway. Sir, she knows things that aren't in any public domain materials. Training details, operational procedures, even personal anecdotes that ring true. Either she's the most sophisticated fraud we've seen, or we're missing something in our records check. When they returned, Cooper's approach had shifted slightly. Ms. Martinez, assuming for the moment that your claims are true, why would your service records be so difficult to verify? Special access programs, Sarah replied. Some missions required security clearances beyond top secret. Personnel records get compartmentalized to protect operational security. And you're claiming you were involved in these types of operations? I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating facts about my service record. Williams leaned forward. If that's true, then there should be someone, somewhere in the chain of command who can verify your service without compromising classified information. There is, Sarah said quietly. My former commanding officer, Captain Rebecca Torres, is now at Naval Special Warfare Command. She could verify my service without revealing classified details. The agents exchanged glances. Cooper made a note in his file. We'll contact Captain Torres. In the meantime, you'll need to remain available for further questioning. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself in an increasingly surreal situation. She was being held at the VA office, not under arrest but not free to leave. While investigators tried to verify a military service record that she knew to be genuine, but classified beyond their immediate access level, Jenkins brought her a sandwich from the cafeteria, sitting down across from her in the security office. Ma'am, I've been thinking about this all day. I've seen a lot of veterans come through here, and I've seen my share of stolen valor cases too. The fakers, they usually trip themselves up pretty quick when you ask detailed questions. And, Sarah asked, and you haven't tripped up once. Every answer you've given checks out with what I know about SEAL training. Either you're the best prepared fraud in history or you're telling the truth. Sarah managed a small smile. I appreciate that, Jenkins. This isn't exactly how I plan to spend my day. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. What made you want to be a SEAL? I mean, knowing how hard it would be being the first woman to try it? Sarah considered her answer carefully. I didn't want to be the first woman to do anything. I just wanted to serve my country at the highest level possible. The fact that I happened to be a woman was secondary to the fact that I was a sailor who wanted to push herself to the absolute limit. Jenkins nodded slowly. That's exactly what I'd expect a SEAL to say. By evening, news of the situation had spread beyond the VA office. Sarah could see through the window that a small crowd had gathered outside, including what appeared to be reporters with cameras. The story of a woman claiming to be a Navy SEAL had caught the attention of local media, and the speculation was running wild. Agent Williams returned from yet another phone call, his expression more troubled than before. Ms. Martinez, we've reached out to multiple levels of Naval Command and we're getting conflicting information. Some sources confirm aspects of your story, others show no record of your service. That's because different parts of my service fall under different classification levels, Sarah explained for what felt like the 100th time. You need someone with the proper clearances to access the complete record. We're working on that, Cooper interjected as he entered the room. Captain Torres is currently deployed, but we've managed to reach her through secure channels. She should be able to speak with us within the hour. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Captain Torres had been more than just her commanding officer. She'd been a mentor and advocate during Sarah's time with the teams. If anyone could cut through the bureaucratic confusion, it was Torres. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah had faced enemy fire, survived grueling training, and completed missions under impossible conditions. But sitting in a sterile office while her honor was questioned felt like a different kind of torture. Rodriguez brought her a cup of coffee as the sun began to set outside. "Ma'am, I've got to ask, if you really are who you say you are, why aren't you angrier about all this?" Sarah considered the question. Anger doesn't solve problems. And honestly, I understand the skepticism. Women in combat roles are still new enough that people find it hard to believe. I'd rather prove myself through patience and facts than through emotion. But doesn't it hurt, having your service questioned like this? It hurts, Sarah admitted. But I've faced worse than skeptical bureaucrats. The training that made me a SEAL also taught me how to handle situations like this. As darkness fell, the conference room filled with more officials. The local VA director had arrived, along with additional NCIS agents and someone Sarah didn't recognize who wore civilian clothes, but carried himself like senior military. Williams stood as the newcomer entered. "Ms. Martinez, this is Commander Harrison from Naval Personnel Command. He's here to help resolve the situation." Commander Harrison was a tall, lean man with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years at sea. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied Sarah with professional interest rather than skepticism. "Ms. Martinez," he said, taking a seat across from her, "I understand you're claiming service with Naval Special Warfare Command." "I'm not claiming anything, sir. I served with distinction for 6 years before being medically retired 3 months ago." Harrison opened a secure tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be classified files. "I've been granted temporary access to compartmentalized personnel records. What I'm seeing here is interesting." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Sarah watched Harrison's expression change as he read, shifting from professional neutrality to something approaching surprise. "Ms. Martinez, can you tell me about Operation Neptune's Trident?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Neptune's Trident was one of her most classified missions, a counter-terrorism operation in Southeast Asia that had never been made public. The fact that Harrison knew about it meant he had access to the highest levels of her service record. "I'm not sure how much I can discuss in this setting." "Sir, you can confirm your participation without revealing operational details." "Yes, sir. I was part of the Advanced Reconnaissance Team." Harrison nodded, making notes on his tablet. "And the operation in the Mediterranean? Codename Poseidon's Fork?" "Yes, sir. Underwater demolition and intelligence gathering." "The injury that ended your career, where did it occur?" Sarah hesitated. The training accident that had damaged her knee and shoulder had happened during a classified exercise. "Sir, that information is classified. I understand." Harrison closed his tablet and leaned back in his chair. "Gentlemen, I can confirm that Ms. Martinez is exactly who she claims to be. Her service record is exemplary, and her security clearance levels explain why her information wasn't immediately available through normal channels." The relief in the room was palpable, but Sarah could see that some people were still struggling to accept the reality of her service. Williams cleared his throat. "Commander, with respect, this is still unprecedented." "A female Navy SEAL? Unprecedented, perhaps, but not impossible," Harrison replied. "The military has been quietly integrating women into special operations roles for several years. Ms. Martinez was part of a pilot program that tested whether women could successfully complete SEAL training and serve in operational roles. And the results?" Cooper asked. Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez graduated in the top 10% of her BUDS class. Her performance evaluations consistently rated her as exceptional. She completed multiple combat deployments and received several classified commendations for valor under fire. The revelation hung in the air like a challenge to everything the people in the room thought they knew about women in combat." Sarah could see the mental adjustments happening in real time, as trained investigators reconciled their preconceptions with documented facts. "If I may ask," the VA director interjected, "why was this program kept classified?" "Operational security," Harrison explained. "Female operators provided unique capabilities in certain environments. The element of surprise was crucial to mission success, and publicity would have compromised that advantage." Sarah found herself thinking about her teammates, the men who had initially doubted her, but had eventually come to respect her skills and dedication. The program hadn't been about proving women could do everything men could do. It had been about expanding the military's capabilities by utilizing every available talent. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Harrison said, "you receive the benefits and respect you've earned through your service. The VA will process your disability claim immediately, and I'll ensure that appropriate documentation is provided to prevent future incidents like this." Williams stood and extended his hand to Sarah. "Ma'am, on behalf of NCIS, I apologize for the inconvenience. We were following standard protocols for suspected stolen valor cases." "I understand," Sarah replied, shaking his hand. "You were doing your job." As the officials filed out of the room, Jenkins approached Sarah one final time. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you for your service. And I'm sorry you had to go through this today." Sarah smiled. "Thank you, Jenkins. And don't apologize. Sometimes the system works exactly as it should, even if it takes a little longer than we'd like." Through the window, she could see the crowd of reporters still waiting outside, their cameras ready to capture her exit. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be headlines about the female Navy SEAL who had been detained for stolen valor, only to have her service confirmed by Naval Command. The story would spark debates about women in combat and the nature of military service. But tonight, as she prepared to face the media attention, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: validation. Her service was real, her sacrifices were recognized, and her honor was intact. The media frenzy that erupted over the next few days exceeded anything Sarah had anticipated. Her story became national news, with coverage ranging from respectful recognition of her service to sensationalized headlines questioning military policies and gender integration. Phone calls poured in from news organizations, book publishers, and documentary filmmakers, all wanting to tell her story. Sarah found herself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, staying at a friend's house to avoid the reporters camped outside her apartment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years operating in the shadows, conducting missions that would never be publicly acknowledged, only to find herself at the center of a very public controversy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Torres, who had finally been able to communicate from her deployment. "Saw the news. Sorry you had to go through that. Your service speaks for itself. Stand tall." The message brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Throughout her career, she'd rarely allowed herself to show vulnerability, but the events of the past few days had worn down her usual emotional armor. She'd been questioned, doubted, and scrutinized in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound she'd sustained in combat. Her friend Maria, a civilian nurse who'd known Sarah since college, brought her coffee and sat down on the couch beside her. "You okay?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I spent 6 years proving myself to teammates, instructors, and commanders. I thought that was behind me, but you did prove yourself. The whole world knows that now. Do they? Look at these comments." Sarah showed Maria her phone, scrolling through social media responses to news articles about her story. While many were supportive, others questioned everything from her physical capabilities to her motivation for serving. "Why do they care so much?" Maria asked, reading over some of the more hostile comments. "Because I challenge their assumptions about what warriors look like," Sarah replied. "Some people need their heroes to fit a specific mold, and I don't fit that mold." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. It was from the Norfolk area, where Naval Special Warfare Command was headquartered. "Hello? Sarah? This is Admiral Patricia Chen. I understand you've had quite an ordeal." Sarah's heart skipped. Admiral Chen was a legend in naval circles, one of the highest-ranking women in the Navy, and someone Sarah had admired from afar during her service. "Yes, ma'am. It's been challenging. I can imagine. I'm calling because I want you to know that your service hasn't gone unnoticed at the highest levels. The program you were part of has been extraordinarily successful, and you've been one of its shining examples." "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. I also want to discuss an opportunity with you. Would you be available to meet with me next week? I have a proposition that might interest you." After ending the call, Sarah felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Opportunities from admirals rarely led to quiet, simple lives, and she'd been looking forward to finally having some peace after her medical retirement. The next few days brought a parade of interview requests, which Sarah mostly declined. She agreed to speak with one veteran-focused publication, hoping to set the record straight about her service and the broader issue of women in special operations. The interview took place in a quiet coffee shop away from the media circus. The reporter, a former Marine named Jake Sullivan, approached the conversation with the kind of professional respect that came from understanding military service personally. A lot of people are wondering how a woman succeeded in what's traditionally been an all-male domain. Sullivan began. Sarah had anticipated this question. I succeeded the same way any SEAL succeeds, through preparation, determination, and the support of teammates who cared more about mission success than gender politics. Were there unique challenges you faced as a woman? Of course. There was skepticism to overcome, both from instructors and fellow candidates. Some people assumed I was there for publicity or to prove a point rather than to serve. I had to work harder to gain respect, but that just made me a better operator. Tell me about your teammates. How did they accept you? Sarah smiled, thinking about the men she'd served with. Military bonds are forged under pressure. When you're cold, wet, exhausted, and someone next to you is sharing their body heat to keep you alive, you stop caring about their gender. What matters is whether they'll have your back when things get dangerous. And did they have your back? Always, and I had theirs. That's what being a SEAL means. You're part of something bigger than yourself. The interview ran for over an hour, covering everything from her motivation to serve to the specific challenges of integrating women into special operations. When it was published, it helped shift some of the public narrative from sensational speculation to a more nuanced understanding of her service. But the attention also brought unwanted consequences. Sarah received threatening messages from people who opposed women in combat roles, as well as marriage proposals from strangers who were apparently attracted to the idea of dating a female Navy SEAL. She found both equally disturbing. More troubling were the calls from military personnel who questioned whether she'd really earned her trident or if she'd been given special treatment because of her gender. These stung the most because they came from people who should have understood the brotherhood of arms. One evening, as Sarah was sorting through mail that had been forwarded from her apartment, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple note: "Stolen valor whore. We know you're a fake." The words hit her like a physical blow. Maria found her in the kitchen, staring at the note with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "This," Sarah said, holding up the paper. "After everything that's been verified, after all the documentation, some people still think I'm a fraud. Those people don't matter, but they do matter. They're veterans, active duty service members. They're supposed to be my brothers and sisters in arms." Maria sat down beside her. "You know what I think? I think some people are so invested in their own version of heroism that they can't accept someone who looks different from them. That's their problem, not yours." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about her future. The admiral's call suggested new opportunities, but part of her just wanted to disappear, to find a quiet job somewhere and live anonymously. The fame she'd never wanted felt like a burden, and the constant scrutiny was exhausting. But as she considered walking away from public attention entirely, she thought about the messages she'd also received, from young women who said her story had inspired them to consider military service, from female veterans who felt validated by seeing their own struggles reflected in her experience, and from male service members who said her story had opened their eyes to the capabilities of their female colleagues. Maybe, she thought, there was value in staying visible, in using her unwanted celebrity to advance conversations about military service and gender integration. Maybe the discomfort of public attention was a small price to pay for potentially opening doors for future generations of women who wanted to serve their country at the highest levels. The decision wouldn't be easy, but as Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she knew she would have to choose between the quiet life she wanted and the public role she might be called to play. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she'd faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. This would be no different. The meeting with Admiral Chen took place in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, a location that immediately told Sarah this conversation was about more than a simple career opportunity. The Admiral was smaller than Sarah had expected, but her presence filled the room with the kind of authority that came from decades of breaking barriers and exceeding expectations in a male-dominated institution. "Ms. Martinez," Admiral Chen began, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat, I've reviewed your entire service record, including the classified portions. Your performance has been exceptional by any standard, and your recent experience with the stolen valor accusations has inadvertently highlighted an important issue. Sarah waited for the admiral to continue, uncertain where this conversation was heading. The integration of women into special operations has been more successful than most people realize, but it's been conducted largely in secret. Your case has forced this issue into the public eye, whether we wanted it there or not. I understand, ma'am. I never intended to become a spokesperson for anything. I know you didn't. But sometimes circumstances choose us rather than the other way around. Admiral Chen opened a folder on the table. The Navy is considering establishing a new program, a training and consulting initiative focused on gender integration in special operations. We need someone to lead it. Someone with operational experience and the credibility to speak to both male and female service members. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Ma'am, with respect, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that role. I'm better at doing things than talking about them. On the contrary, you're exactly the right person. You've lived the experience of being the first woman in spaces where women weren't supposed to be. You've proven that integration can work without compromising operational effectiveness. And whether you like it or not, you've become a symbol. The word symbol made Sarah uncomfortable. She joined the Navy to serve her country, not to represent anyone or anything beyond her own commitment to excellence. What would this position involve? You'd work with SEAL teams and other special operations units to develop integration protocols. You'd consult on training modifications, help establish mentorship programs, and yes, occasionally speak publicly about the importance of utilizing every qualified person regardless of gender. Sarah considered the offer carefully. It would mean staying in the public eye, dealing with continued scrutiny and criticism, and taking on responsibilities she'd never sought. But it would also mean helping other women avoid some of the challenges she'd faced. Can I think about it? Of course. But I need an answer within the week. The Secretary of the Navy is announcing this initiative next month, and we need our team leader in place. As Sarah left the Pentagon, her mind was spinning with possibilities and concerns. The offer represented a chance to make a real difference in military policy, but it also meant embracing a role she'd never wanted. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw you on the news. If you're really a SEAL, prove it. Training Beach Coronado tomorrow 0600, come alone. The message was clearly a challenge, though Sarah couldn't tell if it came from someone genuinely skeptical or someone looking to cause trouble. Either way, her SEAL training had taught her never to back down from a legitimate challenge. She booked a flight to San Diego that evening. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the beach near the Naval Special Warfare Training Center as the sun was rising over the Pacific. The location was familiar. She'd spent countless hours training on this same sand during her BUDS class years earlier. A figure was already there, silhouetted against the dawn light. As Sarah approached, she could see it was a man in his 40s wearing Navy PT gear. His bearing and fitness level suggested active duty, possibly an instructor. You came, he said as she approached. I don't ignore challenges, Sarah replied. I'm Master Chief Rodriguez. I've been an instructor here for 8 years. I've put hundreds of SEALs through their paces, and I've never seen a woman graduate. That's because the program was classified. There were only a handful of us. Rodriguez studied her carefully. I've heard the stories, seen the documentation. But I needed to see for myself. Are you really who you claim to be? What would convince you? Let's start with the basics. Ocean swim 2 miles full gear. Sarah had anticipated this might happen. She'd brought her wetsuit and fins, prepared for whatever test Rodriguez had in mind. The Pacific Ocean in October was cold enough to be dangerous, but she'd swum in worse conditions during her operational career. They entered the water together as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The familiar bite of cold salt water brought back memories of Hell Week, of training evolutions that had pushed her to the edge of human endurance. Beside her, Rodriguez maintained a punishing pace, clearly testing her swimming ability and mental toughness. 2 miles out, they treaded water while Rodriguez asked her technical questions about underwater demolition, combat diving procedures, and small boat operations. Sarah answered each question accurately, drawing on years of operational experience. Tell me about your worst day in training, Rodriguez said as they began swimming back toward shore. Thursday of Hell Week, Sarah replied, her stroke steady despite the conversation. We'd been awake for 4 days straight. During surf torture that morning, I started hallucinating. I thought my dead grandfather was standing on the beach telling me to quit. What kept you going? My swim buddy, Peterson. He kept talking to me, keeping me grounded. That's when I really understood what the teams were about. Nobody succeeds alone. They swam in silence for several minutes before Rodriguez spoke again. Peterson, big guy from Texas, scar on his left shoulder from an IED. Sarah's stroke faltered slightly. You know him? He came through my class 3 years before yours. Good operator. He mentioned working with a female SEAL on a classified mission. Said she was one of the toughest people he'd ever served with. As they reached the shore, both breathing heavily from the 2-mile swim, Rodriguez turned to face Sarah. I owe you an apology. And an explanation. For what? I wasn't trying to test whether you're really a SEAL. I already knew that was true. I was testing whether you'd still respond to a challenge the way a SEAL should. Sarah pulled off her fins, studying Rodriguez's expression. And you passed. Most people would have ignored that text message or brought backup. You came alone, ready to prove yourself again if necessary. That tells me your head is still in the right place. They walked up the beach together, their gear dripping salt water onto the sand. Rodriguez stopped and looked out at the ocean where they'd just completed their impromptu training evolution. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why are you considering walking away from the spotlight? The Navy needs what you represent. Sarah was surprised by the question. How did you know I was considering that? Because I know how SEALs think. You want to fade back into the shadows, do your job without fanfare. But sometimes the mission requires staying visible. This isn't the mission I signed up for. None of us get the mission we originally signed up for. I wanted to be a door kicker my whole career. Instead, I ended up training the next generation. Turned out to be more important work than I thought. As they reached the parking area, Rodriguez extended his hand. Master Chief Rodriguez, but you can call me Alex. And I want you to know that if you take that job with Admiral Chen, you'll have support from instructors like me. Why does it matter to you? Because I have a daughter who wants to serve her country. I want her to live in a world where her opportunities are limited only by her abilities, not by other people's assumptions. The conversation with Rodriguez stayed with Sarah as she flew back to the East Coast. His words about mission requirements echoed in her mind, competing with her desire for privacy and a normal life. That evening, she sat in Maria's living room, finally ready to make her decision about Admiral Chen's offer. The phone rang before she could dial the Admiral's number. Sarah, this is Captain Torres. Captain, I thought you were still deployed. I am, but I wanted to reach out after hearing about the Admiral's offer. Someone told me you're hesitating. I am. This isn't what I wanted for my post-military life. I understand that. But let me tell you something about leadership in the teams. The best leaders are the ones who step up when the mission requires it, even when it's not what they personally want to do. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of expectation from people she respected. What if I'm not good at it? What if I fail? Then you'll learn and adapt, the same way you did during training, the same way you did on every mission. Sarah, you've already proven you can succeed in environments where women weren't supposed to be able to succeed. This is just another mission. After ending the call, Sarah sat quietly for several minutes, thinking about the young women who might follow in her footsteps, about the male service members who needed to see that integration could work, and about her own responsibility to the institution that had shaped her. She picked up her phone and dialed Admiral Chen's number. Admiral, this is Sarah Martinez. I've made my decision about the position, and I accept. When do I start? 6 months into her new role, Sarah found herself standing before a room full of SEAL instructors at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was back where her SEAL journey had begun, but now as someone helping to shape the future of special operations training. Gentlemen, she began, then corrected herself with a slight smile. Ladies and gentlemen. 2 female instructors had been added to the staff in recent months, part of the integration initiative she was helping to implement. The changes hadn't come easily. Sarah's first months in the position had been marked by resistance from some quarters, support from others, and the constant challenge of balancing operational effectiveness with the need for cultural evolution. Her initial assessment had revealed that while women could successfully complete SEAL training, Certain modifications could improve retention rates and performance for all candidates regardless of gender. These weren't accommodations or lowered standards, but refinements based on data and experience. Today we're implementing the new buddy team protocols, Sarah continued. Research shows that diverse teams often outperform homogeneous ones in problem-solving scenarios. We're going to test that theory in a controlled training environment. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had become one of her strongest allies, stepped forward. The evolution is simple. Mixed-gender buddy teams will compete against traditional all-male teams in a series of problem-solving and physical challenges. Same standards, same objectives, different team composition. The training evolution that followed was intense and closely monitored. Sarah watched as female and male candidates worked together, noting how different perspectives and approaches led to creative solutions. A female candidate's smaller frame allowed her to access a confined space that her male teammates couldn't reach. A male candidate's upper body strength compensated for his female teammates' limitations in certain physical tasks. What struck Sarah most was how quickly the candidates adapted to working together when focused on mission success rather than gender politics. The artificial barriers that existed in people's minds dissolved under the pressure of shared objectives and mutual dependence. After the evolution, Sarah debriefed with the instructor staff. The results had been remarkable. Mixed-gender teams had outperformed all-male teams in 70% of the scenarios, particularly those requiring creative problem-solving and communication under stress. This data is going to ruffle some feathers, commented Lieutenant Commander Walsh, one of the more traditional instructors who had initially opposed the integration program. Good data usually does, Sarah replied. The question is whether we're committed to continuous improvement or defending the status quo. Walsh nodded slowly. 6 months ago, I would have said this was social engineering disguised as military policy. But watching these teams work together, it's hard to argue with results. The success of the training modifications was just one part of Sarah's expanding responsibilities. She'd also been tasked with developing mentorship programs, establishing support networks for female special operations personnel, and occasionally speaking at military academies and conferences. The speaking engagements were still challenging for her. Standing in front of auditoriums full of future officers and discussing her experiences felt surreal compared to the anonymity of her operational career. At the Naval Academy, she faced a particularly pointed question from a male midshipman. Ma'am, some people say that integrating women into special operations is just political correctness. How do you respond to that? Sarah had heard variations of this question dozens of times. I respond with facts. Women in my program had the same dropout rate as men. They performed equally well in combat operations. They brought capabilities that enhanced mission effectiveness. If utilizing the best available talent regardless of gender is political correctness, then I'm guilty as charged. A female midshipman raised her hand. What advice would you give to women who want to serve in special operations? The same advice I'd give to any candidate. Prepare yourself physically and mentally. Understand that the standards are non-negotiable and be ready to prove yourself every single day. But also understand that you're not just representing yourself, you're opening doors for others. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by a young woman who looked nervous but determined. Ma'am, I'm graduating next year and I want to try for the teams. But my parents think I'm crazy, and some of my classmates have told me I'm wasting my time. Sarah remembered having similar conversations with her own family and friends years earlier. What do you think? I think I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't try. Then you have your answer. The only person who can decide what you're capable of is you. These interactions reminded Sarah why she'd accepted the position despite her initial reluctance. Every conversation with a young woman considering special operations, every data point showing successful integration, every small victory against institutional bias felt like progress towards something larger than herself. But the work also came with personal costs. Sarah's relationship with Maria had become strained as the demands of her new role consumed more of her time and energy. The constant travel, the pressure to be a perfect representative of women in the military, and the ongoing scrutiny of her every action had taken their toll. You're different, Maria told her one evening as Sarah packed for another trip. You used to be focused but relaxed. Now you're always on, always performing. This job requires that, Sarah replied, though she knew Maria was right. Maybe the job is requiring too much. Sarah paused in her packing. She'd been so focused on the mission that she'd lost sight of her own well-being. The same drive that had made her an effective SEAL was threatening to burn her out in her new role. "I need to find better balance," she admitted. "You need to remember that you're a person, not just a symbol." That conversation led Sarah to make changes in how she approached her work. She began delegating more responsibilities to her growing staff, setting boundaries around her availability, and making time for the personal relationships and activities that had sustained her before her accidental fame. She also began to see the broader impact of her work. Reports came in from other branches of the military about successful integration of women into previously all-male units. Female candidates were applying for special operations programs in record numbers, many citing Sarah's example as inspiration. More importantly, the cultural shift was becoming self-sustaining. Male service members who had worked with competent female colleagues were becoming advocates for integration. Female service members were proving their capabilities in operational environments. The conversation was shifting from whether women could serve in these roles to how to optimize their contributions. One evening, as Sarah reviewed after-action reports from recent training exercises, her secure phone rang. The caller ID showed it was from overseas, Captain Torres calling from her deployment. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. The mission we discussed last month has been approved. You're going to be asked to participate." Sarah felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. Despite her new role, part of her missed the clarity and intensity of operational missions. "When?" "Details will come through official channels, but soon. The team specifically requested you." "Any particular reason?" "They need someone with your skill set and security clearance for a sensitive operation. Gender integration wasn't a factor in the selection. You're simply the best person for the job." After ending the call, Sarah sat back in her chair and smiled. Despite everything that had changed in her life, her core identity as a warrior remained intact. She was still a SEAL, still capable of operational excellence, still trusted by her peers to accomplish difficult missions. The integration work would continue, but she would also return to her roots, proving once again that she was a complete professional, capable of excelling in any role the Navy required of her. 2 years after the incident at the VA office that had changed her life forever, Sarah stood on the deck of a Navy destroyer in the Mediterranean Sea, watching the sun set over waters where she'd once conducted classified missions. But this time she wasn't there as an operator. She was there as an observer, documenting the performance of the Navy's first fully integrated Special Operations Unit. The mission was complex, a joint operation with Allied forces to neutralize a terrorist cell that had been trafficking weapons through maritime routes. What made it historic was the composition of the SEAL team, 3 women and 9 men working together as a fully integrated unit. Sarah watched through night vision equipment as the team approached their target vessel. The lead swimmer was Petty Officer First Class Jessica Chen, no relation to Admiral Chen, a woman who had graduated from Sarah's modified training program 6 months earlier. Behind her, male and female operators moved with the precision that came from months of training together. "Target secured," came the radio transmission. "No casualties. Mission successful." Sarah felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her own accomplishments. This team had succeeded based on their training, their teamwork, and their individual competencies. Gender had been irrelevant to mission success, exactly as it should be. The debriefing took place in the ship's conference room, with Sarah taking notes for her official report to Naval Special Warfare Command. The team's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, who had specifically requested to use her first name to avoid confusion, led the discussion. "Execution was flawless," Kim reported. Chen's smaller profile allowed her to access the vessel's lower compartments without detection. Martinez's language skills were crucial for interrogating the captured personnel. Johnson's technical expertise disabled their communication systems. Each team member contributed according to their individual strengths. Sarah noticed that Kim's assessment focused entirely on capabilities and performance, with no reference to gender. This was exactly the outcome she'd hoped to achieve through her integration work, a military where people were valued for their skills rather than their demographics. After the debriefing, Sarah walked the ship's deck under a canopy of stars. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Chen. Saw the preliminary reports. Congratulations on another successful integration milestone. Ready for your next challenge? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Always ready, ma'am. The next challenge, as it turned out, was bigger than anything she'd previously tackled. The success of Naval Special Operations integration had caught the attention of other service branches, and Sarah was being asked to lead a joint military initiative to establish integration protocols across all Special Operations forces. The assignment would take her to Army Ranger training facilities, Air Force Special Operations bases, and Marine Corps reconnaissance units. It would mean developing new training standards, creating cultural change programs, and continuing to serve as a visible example of successful integration. But it would also mean something more personal, a chance to work with her former teammate, Marcus Peterson, who had been assigned as her deputy for the joint program. Peterson had left active duty the previous year but remained in the reserves, and his combination of operational experience and institutional knowledge made him an ideal partner for the complex task ahead. Their reunion took place at a secure facility outside Washington, where they would spend 2 weeks planning the joint initiative before beginning their travels to different military installations. You know, Peterson said as they reviewed organizational charts for various special operations units, when we were freezing our asses off in Hell Week, I never imagined we'd end up here, planning integration protocols instead of blowing things up, Sarah replied with a grin, leading institutional change instead of following orders. It's weird being responsible for the big picture instead of just our small piece of it. Their working relationship settled into the familiar rhythm they developed during their operational partnership. Peterson's analytical mind complemented Sarah's intuitive understanding of organizational dynamics, and together they developed a comprehensive approach to cross-service integration. The program they designed wasn't just about allowing women into previously all-male units. It was about optimizing team performance through diversity of thought, experience, and capability. Their research had shown that the most effective special operations teams were those that included members with different backgrounds, different perspectives, and different approaches to problem solving. The goal isn't to change standards, Sarah explained to a group of senior officers from all service branches. The goal is to ensure we're identifying and utilizing the best talent available, regardless of demographics. The implementation process took them to military bases across the country and overseas. At each location, they encountered the full spectrum of reactions, from enthusiastic support to sullen resistance to professional skepticism that gradually transformed into acceptance as results spoke for themselves. At Fort Bragg, they worked with Army Rangers to modify selection protocols that had inadvertently excluded qualified candidates based on gender-specific assumptions rather than actual performance requirements. At Hurlburt Field, they helped Air Force Special Operations develop new training scenarios that leveraged the unique capabilities that women brought to certain mission profiles. The most challenging assignment was with Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, where institutional culture ran deepest and resistance to change was strongest. But even there, they found advocates among junior officers who had served alongside women in combat and understood their capabilities firsthand. The breakthrough came during a joint training exercise where mixed gender teams consistently outperformed traditional all-male teams in complex scenarios, requiring multiple skill sets. The data was undeniable, and even the most skeptical senior leaders had to acknowledge the operational benefits of integration. "Ma'am," a young Marine captain approached Sarah after one particularly successful exercise. "I wanted to thank you for this program. My sister is a Marine, and she's been wanting to try for special operations. Before this, I would have told her it was impossible. Now I'm going to help her prepare." These conversations happened regularly now, and each one reminded Sarah why the work mattered. She was no longer just proving that she belonged. She was creating space for others to prove themselves. As the joint initiative entered its second year, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Jenkins, the security guard who had treated her with kindness during her ordeal at the VA office. "Ma'am, I hope you remember me. Jenkins from the VA in San Diego." "Of course I remember you. How are you doing?" "I'm calling because my daughter just graduated from the Naval Academy, and she wants to try for the SEALs. She said you inspired her to pursue special operations. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her throat. That's wonderful, Jenkins. What's her name? Amy Jenkins. She's starting Buds next month. Tell her to look me up if she needs any advice. Ann Jenkins, thank you for treating me with respect that day when others didn't. Ma'am, watching you handle that situation with such grace taught me something about dignity under pressure. I've tried to apply that lesson every day since. After ending the call, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. What had started as a routine VA appointment had evolved into a career focused on institutional change and breaking down barriers for future generations. She thought about the young women now training in special operations programs across all service branches, the male service members who had learned to see capabilities rather than gender, and the gradual but persistent cultural shift toward a military that valued excellence above all other considerations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Saw you on the news again. Proud of you. Dinner when you get back? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Absolutely. I have stories to tell. The work would continue. There were still barriers to break, still minds to change, still standards to refine. But as Sarah packed her gear for the next phase of the joint initiative, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her days as an operational SEAL. The satisfaction that came from knowing her mission was making a real difference in the world. The woman who had once been questioned for wearing a Navy SEAL, Trident was now helping to ensure that future generations would be judged solely on their merits, their dedication, and their willingness to serve their country at the highest level. It was a mission worth the sacrifices she'd made, and one she would continue to pursue with the same intensity she'd once brought to combat operations. The trident on her chest remained as real as ever, but now it represented something larger than her individual achievements. It symbolized the expanding possibilities for everyone who dared to push beyond conventional limits in service of something greater than themselves.